Friends, I invite you to listen to a new story on my Purple Heart Stories channel. Chapter 1: The Drowning Man. My story begins at the moment when the waves have already closed over my head. My name is Nate Ellison, and I am, or rather was, a detective with the Ocean City Police Department. 33 years old, 10 years of impeccable service, and 8 years of marriage that turned to dust in one rainy April morning. They say you never hear the bullet that kills you. Similarly, I didn't notice how my life was falling apart until the very moment it shattered at my feet. That morning seemed nauseously ordinary. Ocean City isn't the postcard version of New Jersey shown to tourists. It's a working seaside town where winter brings howling Atlantic winds and summer leaves your skin burned by salt and sweat. And that morning, the sea breeze carried the scent of an approaching storm. Chloe stood by the stove, stirring something in a pot. Her honey-colored hair was gathered in a casual knot, with a few stubborn strands framing her face. The thin Japanese silk nightgown, my gift from last Christmas, gently hugged her body. I sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through news on my tablet. Sunlight broke through the blinds, stripping the room with bright lines that resembled prison bars. Later, I would think about how prophetic that image was. How about dinner at the Sea Wolf tonight? She placed a plate of omelet in front of me, smiling that special smile that always made me agree to everything. We haven't gone out together for ages. I looked up. 8 years together and she could still make my heart beat faster, curse or blessing. I didn't know the answer then. Tonight, I sipped coffee from a mug with Atlantic City printed on it, the first in our collection of souvenirs. I don't know, I'm on duty until 8. Come on, Nate. She sat down beside me, placing her hand on my forearm. Her touch sent a familiar electric current through my skin. You always say that. I've booked a table for 9. Surely the department won't collapse if the great Detective Ellison leaves on time. I surrendered. Her storm-colored eyes always worked flawlessly. After all, what could happen on an ordinary Thursday in sleepy Ocean City? We bought our 2-bedroom nest on the 3rd floor of a building on Brigantine Avenue with an ocean view 6 years ago. Chloe fell in love with the panoramic windows and milk-blue walls in the hallway. It's like living inside a seashell, she said then, and we signed the papers that same day. On the walls, photographs of our travels, coastal landscapes, and modest diplomas in frames. Mine from the New Jersey Police Academy, hers from the State Penitentiary System College. We both served the law, just on different shores of the same river. I caught criminals on the streets of Ocean City. She supervised them in the Harborview County Prison. Colleagues loved to joke that with a family like ours, criminals had nowhere to go. Either I would catch them, or she would watch over them. We laughed along, unaware of the bitter irony in those words. In the hallway, our uniform jackets hung side by side. My dark blue one and her gray one with the embroidered emblem of the New Jersey Department of Corrections. A professional brotherhood in miniature. Our morning ritual was perfected to automation. While I checked my service weapon, a semi-automatic Glock with the academy graduation date engraved on it, Chloe prepared our badges. We had no children, though conversations about it came up more frequently. Maybe next year, she usually answered, and the topic was shelved again. Now I understand why she kept postponing. The workday began as usual with a briefing at the station. I sat at my desk, covered with folders of current cases, mostly petty thefts from parked cars, a couple of credit card fraud cases, an old lady's report about a missing garden gnome. Coffee from the vending machine burned my tongue. Bitter, like the truth I was about to learn. By noon, the heat outside had become unbearable. The air conditioner in the station wheezed, trying to cope with the humid coastal heat. I went out on a call. 2 teenagers had vandalized an old pier wall, scaring a couple of tourists. Nothing serious. An ordinary day in a detective's life where the most terrible crime is boredom. No storm comes without warning. First the sea retreats, exposing the bottom, then the horizon darkens and only then does the wave arrive. But that day, I missed all the signs. The radio exploded with the dispatcher's alarmed voice when I was standing in line for a sandwich at Jimmy's Diner. All posts, code 446, escape from Harbor View Correctional Facility, repeat, confirmed escape. My heart skipped a beat. Harbor View, Chloe's prison. The sandwich fell from my hands and plopped onto the diner's dirty floor. Time of escape, approximately 2:30 p.m., 2 inmates. One identified as Vincent Clark, extremely dangerous criminal. Second, identity being verified. Perpetrators are armed, repeat, perpetrators are armed and dangerous. I frantically dialed Chloe's number. The dial tones dissolved into emptiness, each one like a punch to the solar plexus. Why wasn't she answering? She always answers. Always. The dispatcher continued. Additional information on the suspect. Vincent Clark, 36 years old, former Marine, serving life for the robbery of Ocean Trust Bank in 2021. Victims: 2 security guards and a visitor. Description: height 62, weight approximately 187 pounds, Navy SEAL tattoo on right shoulder, scar above left eyebrow. I was mechanically recording the information when the dispatcher added something that made me freeze. Note: Clark's accomplices were killed during arrest, but the stolen money, $3,700,000, was never found. This may indicate the escape route. Commotion broke out at the station. Faxes with APBs rustled, patrol officers scrambled. In the photo, Clark looked deceptively ordinary, the type of face that gets lost in a crowd. But his eyes, the cold, calculating eyes of a man capable of pulling the trigger without hesitation. I kept calling Chloe. Silence, my head filled with anxious thoughts. Why today? Why this prison? Why wasn't my wife answering her phone? "Hey, Ellison," Sergeant Marcus called out to me. "Did you reach your wife?" I silently shook my head, still clutching the phone. She was supposed to be on duty in Block D. My voice sounded as if it belonged to someone else. "Strange," Marcus frowned. "The prison administration is tight-lipped. They're hiding something." I sent the 10th message. "Chloe, where are you? Please respond." The phone screen remained black and lifeless like a drowned man's eyes. Her morning "let's have dinner at the Sea Wolf" now sounded like an echo from another life. By the end of the shift, the search operation was in full swing. Helicopters combed the coast, patrol cars blocked highways, but the fugitives seemed to have dissolved into the stuffy evening air. "Go home, Nate," Lieutenant Jenkins said, patting me on the shoulder. "Your shift is over. Maybe Chloe is already there." The drive home became an eternity. The city seemed alien. Shop windows glowed with false cheerfulness. People laughed and hurried somewhere, unaware that someone's life was falling apart. Each traffic light lasted an eternity. Each intersection was a choice between worlds where everything could still be okay, and the one world where I was destined to live. Climbing the stairs, I already knew I wouldn't find Chloe at home. The premonition settled on my tongue with a metallic taste. The key turned in the lock with a treacherously ordinary click. The apartment greeted me with dead silence. Empty bed, unfinished coffee in the Atlantic City mug. On the coffee table in the living room, the TV screen flickered. Chloe always forgot to turn it off. I pressed the remote button, and the room filled with the voice of a breaking news anchor. Harbor View Correctional Officer Chloe Ellison is suspected of aiding in the escape of extremely dangerous criminals. According to the investigation, Mrs. Ellison helped organize the escape of 2 inmates, including the infamous Vincent Clark. The world around me froze as if in a freeze frame. My wife's face appeared on the screen, an official photo from her personnel file, formal, with her hair pulled back and a serious expression. Not at all the woman who made me breakfast this morning and talked about dinner at the Sea Wolf. Surveillance cameras recorded her disabling the alarm in Sector D, and escorting the inmates through a service exit. I collapsed into the armchair. On the screen flashed a grainy surveillance video, Chloe walking quickly down a corridor looking over her shoulder. The same ponytail, the same gait. Even in the grainy image, I would recognize her among thousands. Exclusive information from our source in the prison administration. The anchor lowered her voice to a dramatic whisper. According to preliminary data, there was a romantic relationship between the correctional officer and inmate Clark that had been going on for several months. Surveillance cameras repeatedly captured their meetings in. I turned off the TV, but the echo of the words continued to pulse in my head. Romantic relationship. Those two words, like shards of glass, pierced my consciousness, cutting up everything I had ever believed to be true. The walls of our apartment, covered with shared photographs, now seemed like decorations in a false performance. Here we are on Cape May Beach, her hair blown by the wind, she's laughing, shielding her eyes from the sun. Our honeymoon in Atlantic City, she's leaning against me while the casino lights shimmer behind us. Christmas at her parents', she's kissing me under the mistletoe. How much of it was true? Where did the Chloe I loved end, and the stranger capable of falling in love with a killer begin? The phone in my pocket vibrated, bringing me back to reality. Lieutenant Jenkins. The clock showed 11:42 p.m. Nate, his voice sounded unusually cautious, as if he were speaking to a wounded man. How are you holding up? Tell me it's a mistake. My voice was hoarse, like that of a man who had been shouting into the void for a long time. Tell me these news reports are absolute nonsense. The silence on the other end was answer enough. Listen, son, Jenkins finally said. What I'm about to tell you, it's unofficial, understand, between us. Speak. We reviewed camera footage from the last 3 months. This isn't a sudden loss of reason, Nate. They met in the library, in the laundry room, and utility areas. Chloe disabled the cameras, falsified duty logs. She knew what she was doing. Nausea overcame me, and the room began to spin. But why Clark? He's a killer. During questioning, one of the cellmates said that Chloe, the lieutenant faltered, choosing his words, that she had a reputation. You understand, Clark wasn't the first. It just went further with him. There was a rushing sound in my ears, as if I were underwater. Reputation. My wife. The woman with whom I had awakened every morning for the past 8 years. There's something else, Nate. The lieutenant's voice became barely audible. We found her phone. It was in the staff locker room. I closed my eyes, so that's why she wasn't answering. In it, there are messages, photographs, many photographs, and not just with Clark. It seems she was having an affair with the prison warden Ritz, and with someone from the guards. Damn, Nate, I'm really sorry. I silently stared at our wedding photo standing on the mantelpiece. Chloe in a white dress, smiling so happily, so sincerely. Or was that just an act too? After the call, I felt something break inside me. Reality began to blur at the edges, like a watercolor painting in the rain. I walked to the kitchen and turned on the light. Chloe's morning cup with unfinished coffee still stood on the table. She always left a little at the bottom, said it was for good luck. Rage hit suddenly, like a wave during a storm. I swept the cup off the table. It shattered against the wall, leaving an ugly brown stain on the blue wallpaper we had so carefully chosen last summer. I started laughing, hoarsely, convulsively. God, what an idiot I must have looked like all this time. A detective who didn't notice that his own wife. The laughter turned into dry, spasmodic sobs. I punched the wall, not even feeling the pain. Blood appeared on my knuckles, but I didn't notice. In my mind was an image, Chloe kissing Clark in a prison corridor. The same Chloe who kissed me goodbye this morning as I left for work. Back in the living room, I collapsed into an armchair, staring into the darkness beyond the window, where the distant city lights flickered like a mockery of my pain. Inside was emptiness, a cold, ringing emptiness, like in an abandoned lighthouse. 8 years of marriage had turned into a handful of ashes, scattered by the night wind. The same question kept spinning in my head. Was there ever a moment when she truly loved me? Or was I just a convenient cover all this time? A cop husband, perfect camouflage for a woman leading a double life. Somewhere in the distance, a police siren wailed, and that familiar sound suddenly cleared my thoughts. I caught my reflection in the dark TV screen, a haggard face, reddened eyes, disheveled hair. No, I wouldn't sit here feeling sorry for myself. That's not my way. My gaze fell on the service badge lying on the coffee table. Detective Nate Ellison, a man who had solved dozens of complex cases, tracked down criminals, achieved justice. Well, it was time to take on my own case. I grabbed the phone again and dialed the lieutenant's number. Jenkins speaking. I need leave right now. Nate, his voice took on a cautious note. Listen, I understand how you're feeling, but 1 month unpaid. I've accumulated enough days. A long pause followed. I could almost see the lieutenant frowning, considering my words. You know I can't, that officially. Then unofficially, I squeezed the phone until my fingers hurt. You said it yourself between us. I'm just taking leave, nothing illegal. Another pause, then a heavy sigh. All right, but be aware. If something goes wrong, I know nothing about it. And Nate, be careful. By the way, I hesitated. Where is Chloe now? In the county prison's detention center. The lieutenant's voice hardened. She was detained immediately after the escape. Didn't have the brains to flee with her lover. I hung up and walked to the window. A police helicopter circled in the night sky, its searchlight sliding across the rooftops like a giant finger searching for a needle in a haystack. Somewhere out there in the darkness was Clark, the man who had destroyed my life. For the first time that endless evening, I felt something akin to determination. A plan began forming in my head, clear, simple, and absolutely merciless. I would find Clark, but not to arrest him. Chapter 2: Dark Waters. 3 in the morning. My bedroom had turned into a battlefield. I methodically overturned dresser drawers, emptied closets, checked every corner. I was looking for Chloe's laptop, the one she never left at work, the one whose password she never shared with even her husband. Classified information, she always joked. The laptop was found at the bottom of the laundry basket, wrapped in an old towel. A typical hiding place for an unfaithful wife, so obvious that no one would think to look there. I smiled bitterly. 8 years of marriage, and I was just now beginning to truly understand how her mind worked. Sitting at the kitchen table, I opened the laptop. The screen blinked pleasantly, asking for a password. I drummed my fingers on the tabletop, recalling everything I knew about Chloe. Date of birth, too obvious. Childhood dog's name, Banal. And then it hit me. I remembered our trip to Atlantic City, the same one that started the mug collection. Chloe had won at blackjack then, betting on a combination with a 7. This number has followed me all my life, she had laughed. The number of the house where I grew up, my mother's birthday. Chloe 7 Atlantic. I typed, feeling my fingers trembling slightly on the keyboard. The screen blinked and the desktop opened before me. I exhaled. 8 years of marriage were worth something after all. The folders on the desktop were neatly sorted. Work, bills, photos, personal, too neatly. I opened the email client, but there were only work emails and newsletters. Nothing suspicious, nothing personal. Think like her, I commanded myself, and then my eyes fell on the browser icon. Webmail, of course. Only a fool would use work email for personal correspondence. When the mailbox opened, it was like being doused with ice water. Dozens of emails sent from an anonymous address, all from the last 4 months, all signed simply V. Vincent. They unfolded the story of my wife's relationship with an inmate, from first meetings in the library to a meticulously planned escape. With each letter, the correspondence became more explicit, more personal. And in the last messages, clear indications of the final destination appeared, a small town in Montreal where Clark planned to hide after the escape. The name of a clinic, an address, even the name of a doctor they were supposed to contact. I leaned back in my chair, drumming my fingers on the table. So no one yet knew about the fugitive's final destination. Not the police, not the FBI, not the Border Patrol. This information was only here in these emails, and now only with me. The thought came suddenly, cold and clear as a knife blade. If I deleted all the correspondence, Clark would be searched for blindly. Precious hours and resources would be spent combing the coast, checking roads west and south. And I would know exactly where to go. My finger hovered over the delete key. Somewhere in the back of my mind, the voice of duty still sounded, reminding me of my oath, the law, 10 years of impeccable service. But that voice was growing fainter, drowning in waves of fury and betrayal. This was no longer a matter of law. This was personal. Methodically, email by email, I began deleting all the correspondence, simultaneously emptying the trash. Then the system log, browser cache, temporary files. Nothing should remain. No traces that could lead others to the same destination. Now this was my hunt, and only my prey. Packing took less than an hour. Everything necessary fit into an old duffel bag that I retrieved from the garage. Spare clothes, cash I kept in a hiding place behind the ventilation grate in the bedroom, documents. I acted methodically, as if preparing for a special operation, mentally checking off each item. In the closet behind boxes of winter clothes, I kept a pistol, a Beretta 92 model that I had found 3 years ago during a search of a drug dealer's warehouse. Back then, I hadn't entered it into the report, just hidden it in the trunk. A weapon without history, the perfect tool for what I had in mind. I took out the pistol, disassembled it with familiar movements, cleaned it, oiled it, reassembled it, checking each part. I counted the bullets one by one, as if each already had its purpose. On the kitchen table, I unfolded a map, weighing down the corners with mugs of cold coffee. I knew the route to the Canadian border by heart, not my first year working on smuggling cases. But now I looked at these road lines with different eyes, not as a cop tracking a criminal, but as a man planning a murder. Clark would surely take Interstate 95, the fastest route north, but not right away. He would lay low somewhere nearby for the first day, wait out the hottest phase of the search. I circled small towns within a 50-mile radius of the prison in red marker. Motels, roadside eateries, abandoned farms, all places where a fugitive might hide. I pulled out a second atlas, more detailed, with maps of the border zone. Smugglers call this area a sieve, too many holes, too many blind spots in the surveillance system. I had studied these routes for years, trying to block them. Now this knowledge would work to my advantage. In the pre-dawn twilight, the city seemed foreign and unfamiliar. I drove my Chevrolet through deserted streets, mechanically noting familiar details. A patrol car at the 24-hour store, a blinking traffic light at the intersection, a couple of late revelers at a nightclub. Everything as usual, but now I looked at it through the eyes of a man who might never return. At the city limits, I was stopped by a road patrol, a routine check as part of the search for the fugitives. A young cop shined a flashlight into the car, recognized Detective Ellison, and saluted. "Safe travels, sir." If only he knew. I turned onto the highway heading north. The rising sun blinded my eyes as if trying to make me stop, think once more. But I had already made my decision. Somewhere ahead, a couple 100 miles away, Vincent Clark was making plans for a new life. Plans that would never come to fruition. On the passenger seat lay the bag with the Beretta. In the glove compartment, maps and printouts. In my head, the route and the goal. Everything else remained behind. The detective badge on the kitchen table, the wedding ring in the nightstand, 8 years of life in an apartment that had become foreign in one night. Ahead was only the road, and the vengeance waiting at its end. Chapter 3. Meeting at the Motel. The Lighthouse Motel was one of those places where they don't ask for names and don't look you in the eye. A half-ruined neon sign, of which only the letter L worked, cracked asphalt in the parking lot, gray curtains on the windows hiding everything that happened inside. The perfect place for a man on the run, or for the one pursuing him. I parked the Chevrolet so I could see both the main entrance and the backyard at the same time. 2 days of searching, dozens of calls to old informants, endless hours behind the wheel, and here he was. An old black pickup with hastily painted-over license plates, spotted at a gas station 30 miles from here, stood by the farthest room. The fugitive wasn't even trying to hide particularly well. Apparently, he thought he had escaped the pursuit. The old man at the reception desk didn't even look up from the ancient television when I entered. He just pushed over a worn guest register and a key, muttering something about prepayment. $40 a night, no documents, no questions. Regular business at the border of two worlds. Room 11, right next to Clark's pickup. I specifically asked for it, lying about a noisy company in the far wing of the motel. The walls here were surely as thin as cigarette paper. Every rustle, every sound from the next room would confirm to me that I was on the right track. Inside, the room looked exactly as I expected. A sagging bed, faded wallpaper, a cracked mirror on the wall. In the bathroom, water dripped monotonously, creating a rhythm like the heartbeat of a dying man. Tick-tock. Time is running out. Tick-tock. Ever closer to the culmination. I methodically examined the room, a professional habit I couldn't shake. Thin partition between rooms, shared ventilation, window overlooking the wasteland behind the motel, perfect disposition. I took the Beretta from the bag and placed it under the pillow, within reach with a single movement. From the next room came the muffled sound of a television. Clark was watching the evening news, undoubtedly looking for information about the search, estimating his chances of making it to the border. I sat on the edge of the bed, listening to every rustle. The man behind the wall had no idea that death had taken residence next door. The motel bar turned out to be a cramped room with a low, smoke-filled ceiling and a bar counter polished by the elbows of hundreds of lonely travelers. The only patron sat in the far corner, hunched over a glass. I recognized him instantly, though I had never seen him in person, only in prison photographs. Vincent Clark. In reality, he looked different than in the pictures. Younger, oddly enough, and more ordinary, not like someone capable of coldly shooting 3 people. Worn leather jacket, 2-day stubble, the tired gaze of a man who had long been running from his shadow. I ordered whiskey and sat at the counter with my back to Clark. In the foggy mirror behind the battery of bottles, I could observe his every movement. The fugitive slowly rotated his glass, leaving wet rings on the wooden tabletop. Nervous, or just a habit? "Nasty weather today," Clark unexpectedly said, addressing the space. "On a day like this, whiskey is the only thing to drink." I slowly turned on my stool. I had prepared for this moment, rehearsed my cover story. A sales representative from Trenton, selling medical equipment. Boring job, boring life. Nothing in common with the police badge left on the kitchen table in Ocean City. "Yeah," I responded, raising my glass, pouring like from a bucket. "Care to join me?" Clark nodded at the empty chair next to him. "There's no one else here anyway." Just like that, a killer invites his executioner for a drink. If this were a movie, viewers would say the screenwriter went overboard with coincidences. I picked up my glass and moved to Clark's table. He introduced himself as Steve, an electrician from Pennsylvania. A good cover, almost as carefully thought out as mine. We talked about the weather, gas prices, baseball, the usual conversation between 2 strangers in a roadside bar. "You know," Clark swirled the whiskey in his glass, watching as the amber liquid caught the dim lamplight. "Sometimes I think places like this bar are the last islands of real human connection. Here, people still talk, not buried in phones or tablets, just talk." I noticed how his fingers trembled on the glass, not like a cold-blooded killer, more like a man who had carried a heavy burden for too long. 3 years traveling the East Coast, continued Steve, working his electrician cover, and you know what's the hardest part? Not the road, not the lack of sleep, it's the loneliness. When hour after hour it's just the sound of the engine and your own thoughts. And family, the words escaped me before I could think. A cop's professional habit, probing, asking questions. Something flashed in Clark's eyes, a quick shadow of pain, immediately hidden behind a sip of whiskey. Just my little sister, he smiled, and for the first time that evening the smile reached his eyes. She's special, you know. When our parents died in an accident, she was only 14. I thought she would break, but she created an online support group for children who lost loved ones. Can you imagine? Barely holding on herself but helping others. I felt something tighten in my chest. I had come here to kill a monster, but sitting across from me was a man speaking about his sister with such tenderness that it caught in my throat. Now, Clark stopped short as if catching himself. Now we rarely see each other. My job is like that, you understand. He fell silent, staring into the emptiness before him. A heavy silence hung in the smoky bar air. And you, he suddenly asked, raising his eyes to me, is there someone special in your life? For a moment I pictured Chloe, as she was this morning in the kitchen, or as she was on the camera footage, escorting this man to freedom. I had a wife once, I answered, surprised at how steady my voice sounded. But it turned out I didn't know her at all. Clark nodded with unexpected understanding. Oh, these women. Sometimes I think we don't really know anyone, not even ourselves, especially not ourselves, he gave a cheerless smile. Sometimes life puts us in front of such choices that. He shook his head without finishing the sentence. The bartender turned on the television. News footage flickered, something about politics, about weather, about. There was his phone, Vincent Clark's. Clark barely noticeably tensed but didn't take his eyes off his conversation partner. More whiskey, he asked, raising an empty glass. To chance meetings in roadside bars, and to people who still know how to listen. We sat in the bar for another hour. The whiskey bottle slowly emptied, and the conversation flowed like a river, finding new topics. We talked about 80s music, old movies, places we'd been. Clark turned out to be an excellent storyteller. His tales of local customs and random encounters made us forget about time. And with each toast, it became harder for me to remember the Beretta waiting under the pillow in my room. You know what's the funniest thing? Clark ran his finger along the edge of his glass. Sometimes you can tell a stranger what you wouldn't tell even those close to you. Maybe precisely because tomorrow we'll go our separate ways and never see each other again. I felt a chill run down my spine. If only you knew. I should go, Clark rose, swaying slightly. Early start tomorrow, he extended his hand. Thanks for the company. Tom, I lied, shaking the offered hand. A firm, confident handshake. The hand of a man who had held both a gun and a steering wheel and perhaps someone's life. Good luck on the roads, Tom. Clark left, leaving a couple of crumpled bills on the table. I watched him walk to his room, slightly stooped, hands in his pockets. An ordinary tired traveler. The man I was supposed to kill in a few hours, entering the next room and pulling the trigger. The clock above the bar counter showed the beginning of 12. I finished my whiskey in one gulp and headed to my room. Chapter 4, Unexpected Turn. The worst part is waiting. I sat in the darkness of my room, watching the glowing digits of the electronic clock. 2:47. In the next room it had been quiet for an hour. The Beretta in my hand felt unnaturally heavy, as if filled with lead. I tried not to think about the conversation in the bar, about how Clark talked about his sister, about how his voice broke when he mentioned his parents. None of that mattered. It shouldn't have mattered. In the night silence, every sound seemed deafening. The hum of the refrigerator in the corner, the dripping faucet in the bathroom, the creaking floorboards under my feet when I finally got up and approached the door. The doorknob of the next room was just 2 steps away, 2 steps to the point of no return. I raised the pistol. One shot at point-blank range through a pillow while Clark slept. Clean, quick, without unnecessary words or explanations. The hand holding the weapon was steady, not a trace of trembling. The same hands that had served the law for 10 years were now ready to break it. I silently approached the door of the adjacent room. My heart beat steadily, like a metronome. Years of service had taught me to control adrenaline in critical moments. The pistol fit comfortably in my palm. My left hand slowly rested on the doorknob. The time for reckoning had come. One turn, one step, one shot. And at that very moment, when my fingers tightened on the cold metal of the handle, the night silence was shattered by the piercing wail of police sirens. I froze. Red and blue reflections were already dancing on the motel walls, approaching from the highway. Professional instincts screamed of danger if I were caught here with an illegal weapon at someone else's door. Before I could finish that thought, the door was yanked open. Startled, I recoiled into the shadows, miraculously maintaining my balance. In the doorway stood Clark, fully dressed, with a backpack over his shoulder. He clearly hadn't been sleeping and was ready to flee. Our eyes met. In the dim light of the corridor lamp, I saw in Clark's eyes not the fear of a criminal, but the desperation of a cornered man. The same man who an hour ago had spoken of his sister with such love. "Help me," Clark whispered hoarsely, and suddenly his eyes widened in recognition. "Tom, you're that guy from the bar. God, please, help me get out of here. I'll explain everything later, but I absolutely cannot be caught by the cops right now." The sirens wailed closer, red and blue reflections now flooding the motel parking lot. My finger trembled on the trigger. One shot seemed like all it would take for vengeance to be complete. But if the cops found a body here, if they discovered me with an illegal weapon, even a detective's badge, left at home on the kitchen table, wouldn't save me from 15 years in prison. I cursed under my breath. This wasn't how I had imagined this night, not at all. "My car is around the corner," I hissed, quickly hiding the Beretta in my waistband. "Gray Chevrolet, wait there." Police cars were already entering the motel parking lot. Clark darted toward the back exit and I quickly returned to my room. Grabbed my bag, checked my documents. Everything had to look natural. I'm just a guest, awakened by the noise. Stepping onto the porch, I saw 2 police officers heading toward the reception desk. A third was shining a flashlight at the first-floor windows. I walked to my car, trying to move calmly, evenly. Years of service had taught me the main thing: if you want to remain unnoticed, act as if you have every right to be there. Clark was already waiting, hiding behind the Chevrolet. I opened the door. "Back seat, duck down, hurry." The engine started on the first try. I turned on the headlights and slowly drove out of the parking lot. At the exit, we were stopped by a young patrol officer, a complete rookie, probably fresh from the academy. "Sir, excuse me. We're looking for a dangerous criminal. Have you seen anything suspicious?" "No, officer," I yawned convincingly. "Woke up from the sirens, decided I'd continue my journey. I won't be able to sleep with all this noise anyway." "May I see your documents?" I handed over my driver's license. My heart beat evenly, not a single extra beat. In the rearview mirror, I could see Clark holding his breath, flattened between the seats. "Everything's in order, sir. Have a safe journey." The patrol officer saluted and waved to the next car. We drove onto the highway. The red and blue reflections in the mirror grew smaller until they dissolved completely in the darkness. Only then did I allow myself to exhale. "You can sit up," I tossed over my shoulder. Clark slowly rose, stretching his stiff neck. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You don't even realize." "Shut up," I cut him off. "Just shut up." We drove in silence. The headlights carved out of the darkness the road markings, rare road signs and scraggly trees on the roadside. I turned onto a country road, an old investigator's habit, leaving the main highways covering tracks. Somewhere out there in the darkness, a dirt road led into the forest, the perfect place to end our acquaintance. I glanced sideways into the rearview mirror. Clark sat leaning against the door, looking out the window. There was something resigned in his posture, as if he understood sooner or later luck would run out. A fugitive, a killer, the man who had destroyed my family. Ahead, a turn to the forest road appeared. Clark suddenly leaned forward. "Pull over, I'm going to be sick." I hit the brakes. The car swerved, tires squealed. I already imagined Clark trying to jump out, how I'd have to chase him in the dark. But he really did just tumble out of the car and vomit. It seemed the mix of whiskey and adrenaline had finally taken its toll. "Sorry," muttered Clark, breathing heavily. "Haven't run like that in a while." Dawn was breaking over the horizon, painting the sky a dirty pink. Somewhere in the distance, a seagull cried piercingly. An ordinary morning in a godforsaken wilderness, except there was nothing ordinary about this morning. Chapter 5: Confession. The dirt road ahead led into the forest. I peered into the pre-dawn twilight, looking for a suitable turn. Here, in the wilderness, no one would hear a gunshot. No one would find the body quickly enough to connect it with the incident at the motel. The Beretta pressed with familiar weight against my lower back, reminding me why I was here. Clark sat in the front seat, hunched over and staring somewhere into the darkness beyond the window. He had vomited about 10 minutes ago, and now there was a faint smell of whiskey and bile coming from him. The killer who had destroyed my life now seemed so vulnerable. "Listen," Clark suddenly said hoarsely, not turning his head. "What I'm about to tell you might shock you, but you're the only one I can trust, the only one who can help me. I have nowhere else to turn." I remained silent, searching for a clearing between the trees with my eyes. A couple more minutes and it would all be over. "I need to confess something to you," Clark's voice faltered. "Tell you the truth, the whole truth. I'm not who I said I was in the bar. I'm a fugitive criminal. You've probably already heard about it in the news, right?" "Heard what?" I said through clenched teeth, turning onto a barely visible forest road. "About the escape of an extremely dangerous murderer from prison, the one who killed 3 people during a bank robbery." "4," Clark quietly corrected, "if you count my little sister." I threw a quick glance at him. In the dim light of the dashboard, his face seemed carved from stone. "Yes, I'm Vincent Clark, and no, I won't harm anyone. Just hear me out, okay?" He ran his palm over his face. "It's all about Lily, my sister. When I said I killed her, it means I simply couldn't save her. Do you know what it really means to be powerless? When you're holding a 14-year-old sister dying of leukemia in your arms and doctors say there's experimental treatment, but it costs so much that you realize she can't be saved." His voice broke. I slowed down. Something in Clark's intonation made me listen. "Don't think I'm some criminal. I tried, I really tried. Worked honestly at 3 jobs after being discharged from the Marines. Sold everything I could, got into debt. Lily held on, she's so brave. Every time I came to the hospital, she smiled. Can you imagine? She has this cursed disease eating away at everything inside her, and she smiles and says, 'Don't worry, Vinny, everything will be fine.'" Clark took a convulsive breath, trying to control his voice. "And then the doctors said there were only 2 months left, maybe 3, and you know what I did? I went to the bank asking for a loan, and they wouldn't even listen. Insufficient credit history, no collateral. For them, these were just words, protocol, but for me, it was a death sentence for my little sister." I felt my fingers tightening on the steering wheel. I remembered the crime scene photographs. 3 bodies, blood on the marble floor of the bank, shell casings. "I didn't want to kill anyone," Clark seemed to read my thoughts. "I swear to you, the plan was simple: go in, scare them, take the money. But the guard reached for his weapon, panic broke out." He paused for a second. "Every night I see their faces. Every damn night I blame myself for it. But you know what's the scariest part? I would still do it again. For her, I would. A heavy silence hung in the car. The sea rumbled in the distance, reminding that even here in the wilderness, its voice could be heard. That's why I escaped from prison, Clark turned to me. Last week I received a note. Lily had a relapse, the doctors say. They say it's a matter of days, and the money, that damn money, no one has found it. Only I know where it is, and I need to make it in time. I need to at least try. And Chloe, I didn't recognize my own voice. That correctional officer they said in the news helped you escape. What's that story? Clark gave a bitter smile. Chloe, you know, in prison you quickly learn to read people. She was one of those who gets off on power over inmates. Loved to humiliate, manipulate, especially the more attractive ones. She had a whole collection of lovers among the inmates, a real harem. I felt nauseous. Seducing her wasn't difficult, Clark continued. She was looking for new entertainment herself, boasted about how she manipulated her cop husband, how she slept with the prison warden, how skillfully she played everyone around her. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Clark noticed this and fell silent. Continue, I said through clenched teeth. She learned from other inmates that I had millions hidden on the outside, and to be honest, she came up with the escape idea herself. Bragged that she could arrange anything as long as I could pay. She liked feeling like a Bonnie to my Clyde. Basically, she offered to help me escape in exchange for half of what I took during the robbery. Clark shook his head. But she didn't know the main thing, that I never intended to share with her, that all those promises were just words. Empty words for a chance to see my sister one more time. I jerked the steering wheel, and the car stopped on the shoulder of the forest road. The first rays of sunlight broke through the treetops, painting everything around in ghostly morning light. I turned off the engine and sat for a long time, staring ahead. 8 years of marriage. 8 years I had lived with a woman whom, it turns out, I didn't know at all. Who mocked me, cheated on me, played with other people's lives for thrills. And I believed in our love, believed in our future. A crumpled envelope fell from Clark's jacket pocket. I mechanically picked it up. It was a letter from a clinic dated last week. A bill for treatment and doctor's conclusions. As I read, something inside me changed, turned upside down, fell into place. A long silence followed. Only the wind rustled in the treetops, and somewhere in the distance, waves whispered, breaking against the shore. So, all this to see your sister, I slowly said. Fine, but you do realize they'll find you anyway, that sooner or later they'll catch you. Clark gave a bitter smile. I understand, but if I do nothing, she'll die. You understand, just die, and I won't even be able to say goodbye, he paused. I don't care what happens to me afterward, I just need to see her, at least once. I looked at the clinic letter I still held in my hands for a long time. Then I started the engine. Where to, show me? To the Prometheus Clinic, Clark's voice trembled with sudden hope. It's in Montreal, about 4 hours past the border. I silently turned the car around. About 3 hours drive to the border, and we needed to find a place for an illegal crossing. As a former detective in the anti-smuggling department, I knew all the loopholes. Now this knowledge would serve a different purpose. The sun rose slowly above the horizon, painting the deserted landscape in reddish-gold tones. Ahead lay a long road full of dangers, but it was no longer a path to vengeance, but to something else, to something that could change us both. Chapter 6. At the hospital. The Prometheus Clinic turned out to be a modern 3-story building of glass and concrete on the outskirts of Montreal. White walls, minimalist interior, staff in light blue coats, everything here breathed sterile efficiency, behind which lay the daily struggle between life and death. I parked the Chevrolet in the underground garage. We had been on the road for almost 10 hours, crossed the border via an abandoned dirt road known only to smugglers and local farmers. During all this time, we had exchanged only a few phrases. Each was immersed in his own thoughts. Clark sat clutching the seatbelt with whitened fingers. His face, haggard over these hours, looked as if carved from old wood. "Listen," he said hoarsely, not turning his head. If she looks really bad, I need to be prepared for this. You understand? Please come with me." I nodded silently. I suddenly caught myself thinking that over these hours I had almost forgotten who we were to each other. A fugitive criminal and a cop, a killer and an avenger. All that remained were two men, one of whom was about to meet his dying sister. In the reception area there was a smell of antiseptic and faint perfume. A young nurse at the desk raised a questioning gaze at us. Clark said something to her in French. I only caught the name, Lily Clark. The nurse looked through records on the computer, nodded, and picked up the phone. A few minutes later, a tall woman in a white coat appeared in the lobby, Dr. Morel, as the badge on her chest indicated. "Monsieur Clark," she extended her hand, "we were expecting you earlier." Something like condemnation flashed in her eyes, but was quickly replaced by professional neutrality. She gestured for us to follow her. "The latest tests show progressive deterioration," she said, leading us down the corridor. "The metastases are spreading faster than we anticipated. Without immediate treatment," she paused, choosing her words, "le temps est critique, time is critical." Clark walked with his head down, as if each word from the doctor physically struck him. I stayed slightly behind, ready to support him at any moment. I didn't understand where this protective instinct came from. "She is conscious now," the doctor added, stopping at a light door numbered 317. "But very weak. Please, no more than 15 minutes." Clark froze before the door, his hand trembling above the handle. He turned to me. Will you come in with me?" At that moment, he resembled neither a killer nor a fugitive criminal, just a frightened older brother afraid of what awaited him behind the door. The room was bathed in soft light from a wide window. Cream-colored curtains barely noticeably swayed from the ventilation system. In this calm, almost serene space, the bed seemed like an island where all the world's pain was concentrated. Lily resembled a fragile figurine, so pale, graceful, with enormous eyes and a thin face. The IV drip quietly counted seconds. The monitor beside the bed traced zigzags of her heartbeat, weak but stubborn, like life itself. "Vinny," her voice was barely audible, but it conveyed such joy that it caught in my throat. "You came after all." Clark collapsed to his knees by the bed, grabbed her small hand, all bruised from IVs. His shoulders shook. "Forgive me, little one," he whispered through sobs. "Forgive me for taking so long." "SHH," she smiled weakly, stroking his head with her free hand. "You promised you'd come, and you always keep your promises, right, big brother." I stepped back to the wall, feeling like an uninvited guest in this space of love and grief. But I couldn't leave. Something held me, made me watch. "I tried so hard to wait," Lily continued. Each word came with difficulty, but she stubbornly spoke. "You know, I even started keeping a diary. I wrote down everything I wanted to tell you when you came." She coughed, and a red droplet appeared on her pale lips. Clark rushed to wipe it with trembling fingers. "Quiet, dear, don't talk so much. I'm here, I'm with you." "No, listen," she squeezed his hand tighter. "I know what you did, about the bank, about everything. The nurses watch the news." Clark froze. I involuntarily leaned forward. "You shouldn't have, Vinny." Tears glistened in her eyes. "Not at such a price. I'm not worth." "You are," Clark almost shouted. "You're worth everything, everything, do you hear? And I'll bring the money soon. We'll start treatment. You'll get better, and we—" "Vinny," she weakly shook her head. "My silly, beloved big brother, I'm not afraid to die. I was only afraid of one thing, that I wouldn't get to say goodbye." At that moment, Dr. Morel entered the room. Behind her followed a nurse with a folder of documents. "Monsieur Clark," the doctor said softly, "we need to talk. Please come to my office." Clark struggled to leave his sister. She had already dozed off, exhausted by the conversation, but even in sleep continued to hold his hand. In the doctor's office, there was a smell of coffee and antiseptic. Dr. Morell laid out scans and test results on the table. There is an experimental treatment protocol. She spoke slowly, carefully selecting English words. A new form of immunotherapy developed in Sweden. We've already had cases of remission in late stages. What are the chances? Clark asked hoarsely. 30%, maybe 40 if we start immediately, the doctor paused. But the cost? It's a very expensive treatment. Without a prepayment, we cannot. How much? Clark leaned forward. The doctor wrote a figure on a piece of paper and slid it across the table. Standing by the window, I saw Clark clench his fists. I have money, he said dully. They're hidden. I just need a couple of days to. We don't have several days, the doctor shook her head. Every hour of delay decreases the chances. If treatment isn't started within the next day. She didn't finish, but everything was clear. We stood in an empty hospital corridor, stunned by the doctor's words. 30%. If treatment started right now, delay meant death. Listen, Clark grabbed my sleeve. Desperate hope burned in his eyes. The money is very close. In our aunt's house in a suburb of Buffalo. I hid it under the floorboards in the attic. 3,700,000 in cash. We can be there in 5 hours. I'll give you half, just help. I'm begging you. I silently looked at him. At the man who had killed 3 people for this money. At the brother ready to do anything to save his sister. Whatever you say, I finally said. Let's go. We walked quickly toward the exit. Clark was saying something about how exactly to drive, where to turn, which key to use to open the old lock. His voice rang with excitement and hope. The sun mercilessly beat in our eyes as we exited to the hospital parking lot. The Chevrolet stood in the same place where we had left it. It seemed an eternity had passed since that moment. You know, Clark stopped by the passenger door. I didn't believe I would meet a person in life whom I could trust, who would understand, if it weren't for you. He reached for the door handle but froze upon hearing a metallic click. I was holding police handcuffs. Vincent Clark, my voice sounded hollow, as if underwater. You are under arrest. I'm Detective Nate Ellison, Ocean City Police. Clark slowly turned around. A whole range of emotions reflected on his face. Disbelief, understanding, pain from betrayal, and finally, mortal exhaustion. Lily, was all he could say. She'll die without this money. Hands behind your back, I replied, carefully looking somewhere above his head. We're returning to the States. Chapter 7, Time to Pay the Bills. The border post on the American side greeted us with a gray dawn and barbed wire atop concrete walls. I presented my badge to the officer at the entrance, and the gates slowly opened, admitting us back into the United States. Clark sat in the back seat, his hands cuffed. For the entire journey from the hospital, he hadn't uttered a word. He seemed petrified. In the border station parking lot, 3 police cars with flashing lights were already waiting for us. Lieutenant Jenkins personally came out to meet us, his face shining with pride for his subordinate. You brilliant devil, he firmly shook my hand. Tracking him down alone, crossing the border, making the arrest. This will go into criminology textbooks, Nate. Clark was led out of the car. In the early morning light, he seemed a pale shadow of the man who, just a day ago, had sat in the motel bar talking about his sister. Now there was only emptiness in his eyes. The following week turned into an endless series of congratulations, handshakes, and camera flashes for me. My story filled the front pages of all local newspapers. Hero detective single-handedly captures dangerous criminal. Exemplary cop solves case of the century. Ocean City sleeps soundly. Journalists ambushed me at the station doors, vying for interviews. The ceremonial event at the city hall gathered the entire town's elite. The mayor personally pinned new captain's insignia to my uniform, delivering a fiery speech about the duty and honor of a police badge. Colleagues applauded standing. In the front row, The police chief's wife beamed with smiles, the same one who, just a week ago, had sneeringly grimaced at the sight of the husband of that correctional officer. "You are an example for all of us, Captain Ellison," the mayor said, shaking my hand before the camera lenses. "A true example of loyalty to law and justice." I smiled and thanked him, said the right words about duty and oath, shook countless hands, but before my eyes still stood the hospital room in Montreal and the girl who had only days to live. After the ceremony, the police chief took me aside. "You know, Nate, you're looking at the position of deputy head of the special division, with a salary increase and a new office. Consider it an advance for a brilliant operation. I need people like you." New office, new position, new life. All this should have meant triumph, the peak of a career I had dreamed of. So why did I feel only the bitterness of ashes on my tongue? Oh yes, there was also Chloe. Her trial was set to be a high-profile case. The press was already preparing sensational headlines about the prison Eve, and the correctional officer turned criminal. The prosecutor demanded the maximum sentence for aiding in the escape of an extremely dangerous criminal. Everything pointed to the former Mrs. Ellison spending the coming years on the other side of prison bars. But on the third day of the hearings, news broke that turned everything upside down. A medical examination showed that Chloe was 2 months pregnant. A real commotion erupted in the courtroom. Journalists whispered, trying to calculate dates. The judge frowned, leafing through the case materials. "Determining exact paternity at this moment is not possible," the expert reported dryly, "given the nature of the accused's relationships." At this moment, Chloe burst into tears, dramatically pressing her hands to her stomach. Her lawyer immediately filed a motion to change the preventive measure on humanitarian grounds. The press was ecstatic. No one had expected such a turn. Later, the judge issued a ruling, 2 years probation with house arrest. Given the special circumstances, past service merits, and the defendant's condition, read the protocol. Chloe left the courthouse with her head down, but in the corners of her lips lurked a barely noticeable smile. She had wriggled out again. I wonder, I thought, reviewing the news about the sentence, does she herself know whose child it is? Clark's, the prison warden's, or one of her numerous charges? I filed for divorce the day after the trial. 8 years of marriage fit into a few sheets of A4 paper. Columns, checkboxes, signatures, such simple actions for destroying an entire life. Chloe came to the divorce proceedings in a modest gray dress that emphasized the barely noticeable roundness of her stomach. She sat 2 rows away from me, not raising her eyes. Nothing remained of her usual confidence, a pregnant woman under house arrest, abandoned by her hero husband. Such an image was meant to evoke sympathy even from the most callous reporters. "Are you sure of your decision?" asked the judge, looking at me over her glasses. "Perhaps it's worth thinking about preserving the family. After all, the child." "That child is not mine," I cut her off. "And this woman, she hasn't been mine for a long time either." Chloe flinched as if slapped. At that moment, for the first time throughout this ordeal, I looked her in the eyes. I saw neither remorse nor love there, only the fear of loneliness and anger at herself for getting caught. The process took less than an hour. Nothing connected us anymore. No common children, no property worth claiming. 8 years of life together evaporated like morning mist under the sun's rays. Leaving the courthouse, I felt a strange lightness, as if I had rid myself of a heavy burden that I had been carrying without noticing. I was no longer the husband of that correctional officer. Now I was simply Captain Ellison, the hero cop who had caught a dangerous criminal. But you're probably most interested in what happened to Lily, Clark's sick sister. On that very morning when I was triumphantly returning to Ocean City with the arrested criminal, something remarkable happened at the Prometheus Clinic. An anonymous transfer arrived in the hospital's account, exactly the amount required for the experimental treatment. In the payment purpose field were just 3 words: for Lily's treatment. The doctors immediately began therapy, and what Dr. Morell later called a medical miracle occurred. The girl's body responded to treatment. A month later, tests showed the first signs of remission. 5 weeks later, Vincent Clark received a letter in prison. A crumpled hospital envelope containing a photograph of smiling Lily surrounded by nurses and a short note written in uneven handwriting. "I'm getting better, Vinny. I told you everything would be fine." No one ever found out who made that anonymous transfer. Perhaps it was some unknown benefactor touched by the story of a dying girl. Or maybe someone who knew where the bank robbery money was hidden. The day the letter arrived, guards saw Vincent Clark cry for the first time. But these were tears of joy. His little sister would live. In his cell, he carefully attached the photograph to the wall. Now he had something to serve his life sentence for. And somewhere far away, in a Montreal clinic, his sister was learning to smile again, not knowing that her salvation had been made possible by the man who should have hated her brother more than anyone else in the world. They say every cop has a case that changes them forever. For Captain Nate Ellison, catching Vincent Clark became such a case. Not because it brought him fame and promotion, but because it taught him the most important thing. Sometimes justice and law take different paths, and each person must choose which path to follow. Chapter 8, Epilogue, Ebb Tide. 7 months later. The fishing pier in Cape Vincent, New York, is not the most popular place for tourists, especially in November when the cold wind from Ontario cuts to the bone. But I loved this piercing clarity, just white seagulls, gray sky, and endless water merging with the horizon. Finn's Tavern greeted me with the familiar smell of beer, fried fish, and cheap tobacco. The old owner nodded to me, habitually polishing glasses. In the 3 months I had worked here, helping with boats and occasionally at the counter, he never found out who I really was. To him, I was just Tom, a quiet guy who knew his way around engines and appeared one September day asking for work and lodging. In the corner of the tavern, a television glowed dimly. The news caught my attention. Today at the Ocean City Correctional Center, the state's first ever remote graduation ceremony was held for social work students. The rehabilitation program for inmates through higher education, launched 6 months ago on the initiative of Police Captain Nate Ellison, is already showing its first results. The camera showed a group of inmates in formal gowns over prison uniforms. Among them was Vincent Clark, gaunt, but with clear eyes and a remarkably calm face. The sociology doctor who led the program briefly appeared on screen. This shows that even in the harshest conditions, people are capable of changing for the better. Mr. Clark, for example, not only received the highest score but also developed a social support project for inmates' families. I turned away from the screen and looked out the window. There, beyond the gray curtain of rain, was a small pier and my boat, the only valuable possession I had kept after selling everything else. 6 months ago, I resigned, 2 weeks after the triumphant award ceremony. Colleagues didn't understand. The police chief begged me to stay, promising career growth and new opportunities. I simply turned in my badge, collected my personal belongings, and left. Credit must be given to Lieutenant Jenkins. He was the only one who didn't ask questions. He just shook my hand goodbye and said, "When you want to come back, let me know." I won't return. I can't. Not after personally delivering to prison for theft a man who was trying to save his own sister, and not after earning fame and promotion at the expense of someone else's grief. During these months of solitary night reflections, I finally understood the merciless truth. The respect of others, shoulder boards, awards, all this is tinsel if you cannot respect yourself. The last time I saw Chloe happened by chance. I was leaving the bank after selling the apartment and she was walking toward me with a stroller. Her belly was gone and in the stroller slept a child, small, rosy-cheeked, serene. She met my gaze uncertainly as if not knowing how to behave. At that moment I felt neither hatred nor pain, just deep weariness and strange relief. I nodded to her and walked past. Our shared past remained behind, like footprints on sand washed away by the tide. As for Clark's money, those hidden in his aunt's house in Buffalo, the money strangely disappeared. The house was thoroughly searched, but the $3,700,000 vanished without a trace. Police put forward various theories. Perhaps local residents found the money, or Clark lied about the hiding place. There were other rumors, too. For instance, about a strange anonymous donation received by the Prometheus Clinic in Montreal, or about a large contribution to a fund for children with cancer, or about a new rehabilitation program for inmates through education, for which funding was somehow found. But these are all just rumors. The facts are these. Vincent Clark is serving a life sentence. His sister Lily is recovering. The latest tests show complete remission. And former police captain Nate Ellison disappeared, simply dissolved as if he never existed. I finished my beer and went out to the pier. The rain had stopped and a cool breeze blew from the lake. The water was receding. The ebb tide had begun. On a small table in my trailer lay documents for a new identity and a map of Alaska. Tomorrow I would head further north, to where no one knows the story of the heroic detective and the criminal he caught, where everything can begin anew with a clean slate. And perhaps someday in the distant future, I will feel again what I lost, the sense of rightness in my life, the ability to look in the mirror without disgust, peace. For now, I just want to watch the waves retreat from the shore, the endless, ancient rhythm of tide and ebb that existed before us and will remain after. The waves recede, carrying the past with them, and that's the only justice I can still believe in. The end. If you enjoyed this story, please support the author with a like, subscribe to the channel, and share your emotions in the comments. Thank you.